The courtroom was silent. A man stood trial for a crime he didn't commit. The evidence was weak. The prosecution, aggressive. And the judge? He had already made up his mind. Jamal Rivers was seconds from being sentenced. Years of his life, gone. But just before the gavel dropped, someone entered that room. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't part of the defense. She was the Senate Majority Leader. And she was the judge's daughter. That moment didn't just stop a sentence. It exposed everything. Jamal Rivers never expected to be standing in front of a judge. Not like this. 32 years old. Born and raised in East Point, just outside Atlanta. A software technician by trade. Quiet. Focused. Raised by his mother Ruth. A retired school librarian with soft eyes and a voice that always reminded him to keep his head down, stay polite, and never give anyone an excuse. Jamal had dreams. Not wild ones. He wanted to launch a small tech repair business. Buy his mom a better home. Maybe one day get married, have a kid. Nothing flashy. Just something safe. Something honest. But honesty wasn't enough. 2 months before that courtroom scene, Jamal was walking home from a late shift. He'd stayed behind at the office fixing a security issue on a client's server. His boss confirmed the timeline. There were camera logs, time-stamped emails, even a phone call to his mom at 9:17 p.m. But none of that mattered. At 10:06 p.m., a robbery took place 3 blocks away, a liquor store. The clerk was hurt. No witnesses. Just grainy footage of a tall black man in a hoodie running from the scene. A week later, Jamal was arrested while picking up medication for his mother. No warning, no questions, just 2 officers who approached, asked his name, and pushed him into the back of a squad car before he could ask why. In the police report, they wrote that he matched the suspect's description. Suspicious behavior. Avoided eye contact. Jamal hadn't run. He hadn't resisted. He didn't even raise his voice. But they still called him combative. He was held for 36 hours before anyone let him make a call. His mother thought he'd gone missing. When she finally heard his voice, she broke down in the middle of her living room. The case moved quickly. Too quickly. The public defender assigned to Jamal had 47 other cases that month. When Jamal told him he had proof, time-stamped work logs, his boss ready to testify, a neighbor who saw him come home, the attorney nodded and said they'd do what they could. To understand what happened in that courtroom, you have to understand who was sitting at the bench. Chief Judge Harold Benton, appointed at 44, one of the youngest ever in the state, now in his 60s, with 3 decades behind the gavel and a reputation that carried weight in every courtroom from Fulton to Forsyth. To many, he was a symbol of tradition, of law and order. The kind of judge who didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't second-guess. But to those who knew him better, Judge Benton was something else. A man from another time, from another way of thinking. He ran his courtroom like a fortress, strict, silent, and unmistakably his. He didn't speak much about race, or gender, or politics, but you didn't need him to. He once told a group of law students that compassion is what gets people killed in this job. That sympathy has no place in sentencing. That the streets don't need soft hands. They need iron. In private, his opinions were stronger. He once referred to female attorneys as too emotional. Said diversity in hiring was watering down the profession. And when asked about mandatory minimum reforms, he said, quote, "Some people need to stay exactly where they are." He didn't trust new systems, or progress, or leniency, especially not for young black men. He never said that part out loud. He didn't have to. In his court, you could feel it. The way he looked over his glasses at black defendants. The way he cut off their lawyers mid-sentence. The way he leaned into the prosecution's claims, even when they were thin. By the time Jamal Rivers walked into his courtroom, Judge Benton had already formed his conclusion. In his eyes, Jamal wasn't a man with an alibi. He was a file number, a hoodie, another face in a long line of cases closed. But what Judge Benton didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this case would reach far beyond the walls of his courtroom. That someone was watching, someone with power he couldn't ignore, and blood ties he couldn't escape. But Jamal could already feel it. The weight, the pattern, the quiet assumption that he was guilty before he even opened his mouth. In jail, he kept a small notebook. He wrote down everything. Times, names, feelings. He wrote about his mom's hands and how they shook now when she tried to pour tea. He wrote about how cold it was at night. How loud the cells were. How nobody really looked at him anymore. Not like a person. He thought about what would happen if this went the way everyone seemed to expect it to go. He thought about how quickly a life could be folded away. The courtroom was full, but the attention wasn't. People glanced at their phones. The clerk yawned. The bailiff kept checking the clock. Another day, another defendant, another black man in cuffs. Jamal sat beside his court-appointed lawyer, trying to steady his breath. His suit was 2 sizes too big. He'd borrowed it from his cousin. His tie was crooked. No one offered to fix it. The judge entered without looking at him. Papers shuffled. Formalities mumbled. Then it began. The prosecutor stood and began painting a picture. Loud, clear, and rehearsed. They called Jamal aggressive. Said he had a troubled past, even though there were no prior convictions. Mentioned a dismissed school suspension from when he was 15. Told the court Jamal had no fixed employment, even though he'd held a steady job for 6 years. They referred to him in the third person. The defendant. That man. Not Jamal. Not Mr. Rivers. His public defender tried to object once. The judge waved it off. Said, "Let's move on." No one asked about the time-stamped emails. No one questioned the neighbor who had seen Jamal come home the night of the robbery. The neighbor had come to court, ready to testify, but she was never called to the stand. Jamal's boss had submitted a letter, a detailed one, but the judge skimmed it and placed it face down. Each time the defense tried to push back, the judge interrupted. Every piece of evidence in Jamal's favor was brushed aside, called circumstantial or non-essential. The air in the courtroom started to change, not in any loud, obvious way, but in something quieter, heavier. You could feel it in the way the jury looked at Jamal. Less like people listening, more like people waiting to be told what to think. The judge's tone grew sharper. His questions cut into the defense, never the prosecution. He made eye contact with the DA often, rarely with Jamal. At recess, Jamal leaned toward his lawyer and whispered that he was scared. The lawyer didn't respond. He just nodded, rubbed his eyes, and said they'd try again in the afternoon. When they resumed, the judge denied a motion to introduce new evidence. Digital security logs from Jamal's workplace claimed the chain of custody wasn't clear enough. Then came the prosecutor's final statement. Bold, certain. He called Jamal a threat to society. Said he showed no remorse. Jamal hadn't even spoken. He wanted to. He'd written a statement in his notebook, rehearsed it again and again in the holding cell. But when the time came, his lawyer told him not to risk it. Told him the judge wouldn't like it. So Jamal stayed quiet. When the session ended, the judge gave his closing instructions to the jury. They were short, flat, and they included every point made by the prosecution. Nothing from the defense. Outside the courthouse, a few local reporters lingered. One of them had picked up on the irregularities. No defense witnesses denied evidence, an overly aggressive prosecution. She jotted notes, raised her eyebrow. But inside, the walls were thick, the process too fast, and Jamal's mother sat alone in the back row, clutching her son's jacket, whispering prayers into her shaking hands. She'd seen this before. Different names, different courts, same outcome. As they led Jamal out in cuffs again, she called out softly. He turned, just slightly. Their eyes met for a second. She smiled, but her eyes were full. The next hearing was set for Friday. Sentencing. Everyone assumed it would be swift. No one knew what was coming. Senator Amara Benton had spent most of her life staying out of her father's shadow. She didn't talk much about him. Not to the press. Not in interviews. Sometimes, not even to her staff. She'd built her own name, brick by brick. Law school at Howard. Civil rights litigation in Baltimore. Then state senate. Then federal. Her speeches didn't make headlines because they were loud. They made headlines because they were precise, focused, unapologetic. She didn't speak to inspire. She spoke to move things, to change laws, shift budgets, protect lives. She was known for standing up for people the system had forgotten. Her legislation on criminal justice reform had passed in both chambers with bipartisan support. She was the one who got body cams funded. She was the one who fought to overturn wrongful convictions tied to coerced testimony. In D.C., they called her the Quiet Storm. Back home, some folks still called her Harold Benton's daughter. But that wasn't a title she wore with pride. Their relationship had splintered years ago. Just after college, one heated conversation during a holiday visit had turned into silence that lasted nearly a decade. She never told the press what caused the break. She never told her colleagues. But the truth was simple. She saw what he didn't want to see. And he refused to listen. Amara had spent her life watching the law from two different angles. The courtroom her father ruled, and the streets where she saw what that rulership did to black lives. Now she was Senate Majority Leader, third in line to the presidency. Headlines said she was being quietly vetted for a future bid at the Oval Office. But when her office received a quiet request, a letter from a local journalist about a case in Georgia, it wasn't politics that made her pause. It was the name. The case file was brief. A man named Jamal Rivers, first-time defendant, inconsistencies in the timeline, a judge who had denied evidence, a pattern of behavior that matched old rumors Amara had heard for years but had learned to block out. The letter said, "The case is being rushed. Sentencing is Friday. The judge is Chief Harold Benton." She read that line twice. She didn't call him. She didn't need to. Amara closed her office door, sat still for a full minute, then picked up her phone. Not to the media, not to the court, but to her security team. She said she was going to Georgia. In person, no press, no headlines, no announcement. She didn't go as a politician. She went as a daughter. And this time, she wasn't staying silent. Friday, the courtroom looked the same. Same faded flags, same wood-paneled walls, same worn carpet that swallowed footsteps. But something was different. The bailiff arrived earlier than usual. Nervous, adjusting his collar, whispering to the clerk. The prosecutor checked his notes twice, then once more for nothing in particular. The judge arrived late. A minute, maybe two. His face unreadable. He looked toward the gallery, just briefly, then looked away. Amara Benton had entered without a sound. No press, no security detail in uniform. Just one aide, seated quietly behind her. She wore a gray blazer. No makeup. No expression. To most in the room, she was just another observer, but not to the judge. He noticed her, the way her arms stayed folded, the way her eyes didn't blink. He didn't acknowledge her, didn't say her name. He just cleared his throat and began. The hearing started with procedural remarks, legal language, dry statements. No one mentioned that the most powerful black woman in Congress was sitting 10 feet away. Jamal didn't know who she was. Not yet. He saw her, though. A woman in the gallery. Calm. Still. Watching. He didn't know why. But something in him felt steadier. The prosecution repeated their case. Again, they pushed hard. Jamal's lack of remorse. His so-called refusal to testify. They made no mention of the denied witnesses. No mention of the alibi. The defense tried again. This time more urgent. They begged the judge to reconsider the digital logs. They asked for permission to reintroduce the neighbor's testimony. The judge denied both. Then came the moment. Jamal's mother stood, politely, quietly, and asked if she could speak. The judge stared at her for a long moment, then said no. Amara's eyes didn't move. Her arms didn't shift. But the silence that followed her gaze was louder than anything spoken. The judge adjusted his glasses, took a breath, looked at the paper in front of him. That's when he saw it. A handwritten note, slipped onto his bench just minutes before. It read, "She's here." He didn't look up. Not right away. Because in that moment, everything he had done, everything he had chosen to overlook, stood still in front of him. His rulings, his bias, his silence. He wasn't just sentencing a man. He was being watched by someone who knew him better than anyone. Someone who had once called him father. And she had come not with cameras or reporters, but with presence. The courtroom was quiet again, but the weight had shifted, and for the first time in a long time, the judge felt it. Not control, not certainty, pressure. The judge adjusted his robe, cleared his throat again, reached for his pen but didn't write. The courtroom was waiting. Jamal sat still, unsure of what had just shifted. He could feel it though, like a sound he couldn't hear, but his body recognized. The judge began reading from a prepared statement, his voice slower than usual, almost cautious. He spoke about facts, about responsibility, about what it meant to serve justice without fear or favor. But his words stumbled, his sentences dragged, and then he stopped, midline. He looked up, right at her. Still no name. Still no greeting. But the glance said more than words. His voice dropped. He told the court he was ordering a recess. Said he needed to review newly raised concerns. He didn't explain. He just stood, faster than usual, and left through the private door behind the bench. Inside his chambers, the walls weren't thick enough to block the truth anymore. He sat down, hands shaking, looked at the folder again. Jamal's case file, and the letter that came with it. Not from the press, not from his staff, but from Amara. No formal complaint, no threats, just a page, typed, one sentence bolded. I'm watching. He'd spent years pretending their distance was choice, that she had moved on, that she had become someone he didn't recognize. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, he'd pushed her out. Years ago, when she brought him statistics about racial disparities in sentencing, when she challenged his courtroom habits, when she told him point blank that he was part of the problem. He told her she was overreacting, that she was being political, that she didn't understand what the courtroom required. And she left. Now, she was back. But not as a daughter pleading with a father. As a witness. To everything. Back in the courtroom, Jamal waited in silence. His lawyer checked the time. The prosecutor whispered to the clerk. Amara hadn't moved. Then a door opened. The judge returned. No robe, just a dark suit and a tight face. He asked for everyone to remain seated. He took the bench, paused, and said words no one in that courtroom had ever heard from him before. I have a personal conflict of interest that requires recusal. Gas, whispers, confusion. He didn't explain, didn't look at Jamal, didn't look at his daughter. He stood and walked out. In his absence, the court recessed again. A higher judge would be assigned. An emergency motion was filed to reopen Jamal's case. The prosecutor's tone shifted immediately. The energy changed, and Jamal, still silent, looked across the courtroom. Amara finally met his eyes. She gave him a single nod. Not a smile, not a promise, just recognition. He nodded back. He didn't know who she was. Not yet, but something told him. This wasn't over. And for the first time in weeks, he let himself hope. The news broke within hours. Chief Judge Harold Benton recuses himself amid allegations of bias. It spread faster than expected, not because of his name, but because someone had been sitting in that courtroom. Someone who held real power. Reporters started connecting dots. Quiet calls were made to Senate offices. And then came the second headline. Senate Majority Leader present at courtroom during controversial trial. By morning, cameras were outside. But Amara was gone. She didn't stay for interviews. She didn't give a statement. She wasn't looking for attention. Her work was already in motion. She called in legal experts, civil rights attorneys, public defenders who knew the game and knew how it was rigged. She didn't pull strings. She exposed them. The judge who replaced her father reviewed the entire file. From scratch. No shortcuts. No assumptions. They reopened the witness list. They introduced the digital evidence. They called the neighbor to the stand. It all unraveled. Jamal's alibi was solid, confirmed by 3 sources. The workplace logs showed he couldn't have been near the scene. The neighbor swore under oath she saw him arrive home that evening, exactly when he said. The jury didn't take long. Not guilty. Jamal didn't cry. Not right away. He just stood there, as if waiting for someone to pull it all back, as if the system would change its mind again. But it didn't. He walked out of the courthouse a free man. Not a headline, not a hashtag, just a man who got his life back. Barely. His mother met him at the steps, held his face in her hands, whispered something only he could hear. He looked around for the woman from the gallery. She wasn't there, but he never forgot her. He didn't know she'd already filed a formal request with the State Judicial Board. Didn't know that behind closed doors, a review had begun, one that would comb through every case Judge Benton had ruled on in the last 10 years. Some were fair, some were not, and quietly, one by one, cases were reopened. Lives that had been paused, broken, or erased were given another chance. Amara never spoke about her father publicly, even as journalists pressed her, even as the story made national headlines. What she did say months later, during a floor speech on criminal justice reform, was this: accountability doesn't start with people we don't know. It starts at our own table. She didn't mention Jamal. She didn't have to, but he watched that speech on a borrowed laptop in his cousin's apartment months after the case ended. He watched every word. Then he closed the lid and exhaled. Months passed. The headlines moved on. New scandals, new distractions. The nation's attention drifted, as it always does. But for the people at the center of it all, nothing had gone back to normal. Because nothing about this had ever been normal. Jamal wasn't the same. He moved differently now. Spoke less. He carried something in his shoulders. Even when he smiled. A heaviness that people around him didn't always understand. He'd missed his sister's wedding. Lost his job. Lost months of time he'd never get back. But he also gained something. Clarity. That justice, if it comes at all, often comes late. And not by the system's design. But in spite of it, he started attending community forums. Quietly, at first. Then speaking up. His story, raw as it was, echoed in rooms filled with people who knew it all too well. They didn't know his name from the news. They knew his face from their own stories. And one day, he walked into a school auditorium for a panel, sat beside lawyers, educators, and one former judge, and told the truth. He didn't survive because the system worked. He survived because someone powerful watched when it mattered, and chose not to look away. As for Amara Benton, she kept moving. Her legislative reforms grew stronger, harder to ignore. She introduced a bill that would make it mandatory for judges to disclose personal relationships in cases tied to race or public controversy. It didn't pass easily, but it passed. She never addressed her father publicly, never confirmed or denied anything. But insiders said her silence wasn't avoidance. It was control, because this wasn't about one man. It was about all the ones who had never been challenged. And for her, justice wasn't a headline. It was a process. A slow one, a flawed one, but still worth fighting for. Judge Harold Benton retired early, quietly. No statement, no interview. Some said it was health-related. Others said it was shame. What mattered more than why he left was who stayed. Jamal, Amara, and all the people who'd been watching. Not for scandal, not for revenge, but for truth. Because this wasn't a story about a twist. It was a story about choices. One judge who chose silence over fairness. One man who chose not to break. And one daughter who chose to stand up, without raising her voice. Justice didn't come with flashing lights. It came with eyes that stayed open, and a voice that said, "I'm watching." So ask yourself, what would you have done? If the judge was your father, and the man in chains was your brother? Would you still be silent, or would you speak?